My wife's family didn't want us to have children and fought with us, so we left home. My name is Ellis, and I'm 34 years old. My wife, Marla, is 32. We've been married for 5 years, and from the very beginning, we agreed on something important. We weren't sure if we wanted children. It wasn't a hard no, more like a shared, gentle, let's see how life goes. We made a promise to revisit the topic later, when we had a clearer sense of the kind of life we wanted to build together. That time came earlier than I expected. Last month, we celebrated our 5th anniversary. Life was steady. Marla and I both had jobs we liked well enough, we lived in a quiet, comfortable house in the suburbs, and we had a rhythm to our days that felt easy. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. There were no lingering arguments or simmering resentments. Things felt, on the surface, like what people mean when they say settled. But something had begun to shift inside me. It was subtle at first. I'd find myself lingering a little longer when I saw families at the park. I started imagining what it might be like to teach someone how to ride a bike or read bedtime stories. These weren't idle thoughts anymore. They came with weight, a kind of clarity I hadn't had before. I realized I wanted to be a father, not in some future tense, hypothetical way, but in a quiet, real-world, daily life way. I didn't want to spring it on Marla or make it dramatic, so I planned a simple dinner one evening. Just the two of us. Pasta, soft music, a few candles. Nothing big. I waited until we were both seated and relaxed, then I brought it up. To my surprise, she didn't tense up. She didn't shut down or deflect. She just listened. When I told her I'd been thinking about having a child, she was quiet at first. She looked down at her plate, then back at me, and after a pause, she said, "Okay. We should talk about what that would look like." I told her I wasn't rushing, and that we could take our time. What mattered most to me was honesty. Over the following days, Marla surprised me. She didn't just nod politely or offer vague words, she started asking real questions. When would we want to start trying, if we did? How would we manage finances? Would we want to stay in this house or find a new one better suited to raising a child? One afternoon, I noticed a few open tabs on her laptop, articles about preparing for parenthood, about navigating the decision thoughtfully. Nothing major, but enough to show she was genuinely considering it. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. A week later, we hosted a small dinner for her father's birthday. Just her parents, her older sister Cora, and Cora's husband, Neil. I was on grilling duty, and Marla handled the side dishes. It was relaxed, music playing, glasses filled, everyone smiling. It felt like one of those rare, easy evenings where everything clicks. Until it didn't. We had just finished dinner when it happened. Marla picked up her glass, turned to Cora with a smile, and said lightly, "Guess who wants to be a dad now?" She meant it as a joke, one of those casual, teasing remarks couples toss around to signal a shared secret. She even gave me a quick smile, like we were both in on it. But the moment the words left her mouth, the air in the room changed. Her mother, Patrice, stopped mid-sip, holding her wine glass frozen in midair. Her father, Claude, set his fork down and stared at me like I'd said something unforgivable. Then he said, loudly and without hesitation, "That's not going to happen." The room went completely silent. I blinked, unsure if I had misheard him. But Claude's expression didn't soften. His jaw was set. His eyes didn't move from mine. Marla turned to him, stunned. "What do you mean?" Claude didn't answer. Patrice gently set her glass down, her lips pressed tightly together. Cora gave a small, awkward laugh and said, "We just always figured you weren't having kids." That's what we understood. I asked, "What understanding?" There was a beat of silence before Cora answered. "We made plans, Ellis. Long-term ones. Around you two being different. Child-free." She said it like we were supposed to be proud of it. I looked at Marla. She seemed just as blindsided as I was, staring at her family as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Then Neil, who had been quiet all evening, muttered under his breath, "This would throw everything off." I asked what he meant. He looked down at his plate and said nothing more. The cake was left untouched. The gifts never made it out of the hallway. Claude stood up first, muttering something about needing to go. Patrice followed, and Cora gave us a tight, unreadable smile before heading out the door. Marla didn't speak much that night. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the floor. Eventually, she said, "I think I opened a door I didn't even realize was locked." Then she went to bed. I lay awake that night, trying to make sense of it. There was something beneath the surface I hadn't seen, something her whole family had quietly built their hopes around. And without knowing, I had disrupted it. The next morning, the house was still. I found Marla at the kitchen table, coffee made but untouched. Her phone was next to her, screen dark. I sat across from her and waited. She didn't speak. I poured myself a cup and we sat like that for a while, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, she began to talk. She told me her family had always seen us as the anchor couple. That was the phrase they used, the ones who didn't rock the boat, who made responsible choices, who didn't demand anything chaotic or unexpected. When her sister's marriage had fallen apart a few years ago, her parents held us up as the example. That's what stability looks like, they'd said. Apparently, us not having children had become part of the family foundation. And they had built plans on that assumption. Marla explained that over the years, her family had grown comfortable with the idea of us being the constant. The fixed point. The quiet house, the no kids, no surprises couple they could always count on. When things in the family felt unpredictable, we were the fallback, the example of control and calm. She said it had never occurred to her that they were building plans around that assumption. They'd never sat her down and said it directly, but over time, the implication had grown louder. Her parents had hinted they'd help us renovate the kitchen someday, talked about simplifying estate matters since things would be easier without grandchildren in the mix, and praised our reliable, sensible lifestyle. At the time, Marla had thought it was just flattery. Now, she was beginning to see it for what it really was, quiet conditioning. They weren't just supporting our choices, they were depending on them. She pulled out an old notebook later that day. In it were notes from a conversation she'd had with her mother years earlier. Scrawled in the margins were phrases like, "Keep it simple, easier tax planning," and "You two are the steady ones." They had once felt like compliments. Now they read like boundaries. Her phone buzzed as she flipped the pages, one unread message from Cora. It said, "Hope you know what you're doing. You're not the only ones affected by this." Marla didn't reply. Less than an hour later, I got a call from Claude. He skipped any kind of pleasantries and got straight to it. "We can't let this happen," he said. "You two don't understand the balance. This isn't just about one baby. It's about the whole structure we've built." He brought up the house, the contribution they made to our down payment when we bought it 4 years ago. He said they did it in good faith, with certain expectations. He didn't say the word loan, but the implication was heavy. If we changed the plan, if we had a child, that support would end not just in the future, but immediately. That's when I cut him off. "If your help comes with conditions, we don't want it," I said. He was silent for a moment, then hung up without another word. When I told Marla, she didn't seem surprised. Just disappointed. Not at me, just at everything. At what her family had become without her noticing. Later that night, she stood in front of the sink, staring at the untouched coffee she had poured that morning. Then she dumped it out and whispered, "I didn't think they'd try to control us. I really didn't." That evening, she opened a filing drawer and pulled out a stack of folders. I thought she was organizing, but she was searching. Within a few minutes, she found what she was looking for, more notes. Financial breakdowns, snippets from phone calls with her parents, and most importantly, paperwork from when we bought our home. That's when she told me something I hadn't known. Her father hadn't just contributed to the down payment. He had also arranged the paperwork through a lawyer he trusted, a family friend. At the time, it was presented as a way to ease the process. Marla had signed things quickly, without really questioning it. When she laid the deed out on the table, I finally saw the numbers for myself. 30% in my name. 30% in hers. 40% in her parents'. I looked at it twice, hoping I had misunderstood. She tried to explain. Said her father had claimed it was just for tax purposes, something about shielding liability. She had believed him. I believed her. But it didn't change what was now in black and white. I asked what that meant now. What happens if we have a child? I said. Do they get a say in that too? She didn't answer. I scheduled a meeting with a real estate lawyer 2 days later. I needed clarity. I needed to understand what we were standing on. The lawyer didn't sugarcoat it. With 40% ownership, Marla's parents had more legal control over the property than I did. If we ever wanted to refinance, sell, or make significant changes, they could block it. And if there was a disagreement, it could tie us up in court for months, maybe longer. Then the lawyer paused and said, "Have you looked at the trust itself?" I hadn't even known there was a trust. He pulled up the documentation. Buried within it, written in small, bureaucratic language, was a clause that made everything clearer, and worse. The house had been placed into a family trust created by her father. Within it was a provision that stated, no minor children shall reside on the premises without written consent from a minimum of 2 ownership parties. In other words, we needed her parents' written approval to raise a child in our own home. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. This wasn't about helping you buy a house, he said. This was about long-term control. Quiet control. I went home and told Marla everything. I showed her the clause. She read it slowly, then closed the folder and didn't say anything for a long time. That night, she sat on the floor beside our bed, knees pulled up, head resting on her arms. She looked exhausted, not just physically, but like something inside her had worn thin. This house, she said finally, it never really belonged to us. We agreed to see a therapist together. Not because we were at war with each other, but because the life we had been living suddenly felt like a stage set, and neither of us knew what was behind the curtain. Our first session with the therapist wasn't easy. Marla cried almost the entire hour, not in big, dramatic waves, but in that quiet, exhausted way where the tears don't stop, even when nothing is being said. I mostly listened. Near the end of the session, the therapist spoke softly, like she was guiding us across ice. This isn't only about children. It's about authorship, who gets to write the story of your life. Afterward, Marla and I sat in the car for almost 15 minutes, not speaking. Then she asked if we could go back to the rental together. We didn't talk about the house. Not that night. But the next morning, we did. I told her there was no version of our lives where I could raise a child in a house someone else could use against us. Not with her parents holding the keys to something so intimate. We need to make a clean break, I said. Either we buy them out completely or we sell the house and start again. She didn't argue. But she didn't agree either. She just said, I need time to think. 3 days later, her sister showed up at our front door. Cora knocked hard, waited a moment, then rang the bell twice. I opened it but didn't invite her in. She launched into a speech, saying I was pressuring Marla and tearing the family apart. She said I was twisting everything and making it us versus them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get pulled in. I told her calmly, I'm not having this conversation. Not here. Not like this. And then I closed the door while she was still mid-sentence. 2 days later, another letter arrived, this one from a new law firm her parents had hired. It was direct. They stated that any attempt to alter the terms of the trust would result in legal action. They accused me of acting in bad faith and warned there would be consequences. I forwarded it to our lawyer, who drafted a response that was just as firm. We requested a neutral appraisal of the home and submitted a formal buyout proposal. We also included an amendment to the trust requesting the removal of any clause restricting the property's use by children. That same night, Marla sent me a short message. They think this is a war. I replied. Because it is. We didn't start it. But we won't lose it by pretending it's something it's not. She didn't respond. She also didn't show up to our next therapy appointment. I went alone. The therapist asked me a simple question. Are you preparing for both outcomes? I told her I was. That evening, I sat down at my laptop and opened several tabs for rental properties near the city where my company had offered me a promotion. It was a better position, more flexibility, more pay, better benefits. Enough to support a child without financial strain. I wasn't making any big decisions yet. But I needed to be ready. 4 days later, we heard back from Claude's legal team. They said they would agree to sell their 40% of the home. But at a price that factored in what they called emotional equity, lifestyle sacrifices, and non-monetary contributions. The amount they asked for was nearly twice what their share was actually worth. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a barrier. They were trying to make it too expensive to walk away. I took a photo of the number and sent it to Marla with a message. They want to make freedom unaffordable. I won't let them. If you're still with me, meet me halfway. 3 days passed. No reply. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, she finally messaged me. I'm ready to meet. But not to fight. We set up the meeting with our therapist. By Saturday, we were sitting across from each other again. In that same room with warm lights and soft carpet. She was quiet at first. Then she started talking. She said her whole life had been a series of nudges from her parents, her sister, even old family friends. Little choices that didn't feel like choices at the time. They'd encouraged her to go to college close to home. They'd supported her first job, which just happened to be in her mother's friend's firm. They had helped us pick a house, already knowing which one they wanted us to choose. At the time, it had felt like safety. Now, it felt like a series of walls disguised as guidance. Then I asked her a question, only one. Do you want children? Not them. You. Her voice cracked. She tried to answer, then stopped. When she finally spoke, it came all at once. Yes, she said. I do. I always have. But every time the thought got too close, I heard my mother's voice in my head saying, don't throw your freedom away. Or, children are a burden. Or, they break you down. She said it had gotten to the point where even wanting children made her feel like a traitor. The therapist leaned forward, hands folded in her lap, and said gently. You're not betraying anyone. They built a future on something you never promised. After the session, we sat in the car again. I turned to her and said, the house isn't safe. Not emotionally, not legally. We need to get out even if it means taking the hard way. I've already started preparing. She didn't nod. But she didn't argue either. She said she needed time to think. And that, for Marla, was movement. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Marla's rental. Not from a lawyer. Not stamped with legal language. This one was from her parents, directly. Inside was a revised version of the trust document. They'd added a new clause. It wasn't enforceable, but it was clear in its intent. The clause said that any ongoing financial support, including help with property taxes, home maintenance, and future renovations, was tied to one condition. The house must remain child-free. Not just now. Forever. No children living there, visiting frequently, or listed as residents. Marla read it aloud, standing in the kitchen of my apartment. When she finished, she folded the letter in half. Then she tore it down the middle, calmly, and dropped the pieces into the trash. This isn't normal, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. Just tired. Certain. That same afternoon, my attorney filed a formal petition with the county court, requesting a legal review of the trust. Our claim was that the terms had been created in bad faith, with the intent of exerting inappropriate influence over private family matters. We knew it could take months. But for the first time, it felt like the right kind of long fight. We didn't hear from her sister. Not immediately. No texts. No emails. Just silence. Then, without warning, Marla received a message from a cousin, someone she only saw at weddings and holidays. The cousin said her parents had hosted a dinner. Not casual. Not friendly. It was called a strategy meeting. Her parents, Cora, and a few close relatives had gathered to figure out what to do about the situation. Marla and I weren't invited. That night, we both sat on the couch in the quiet, staring at nothing for a long time. She said softly, they're still trying to find a version of this that keeps us on the script. Later that week, I signed a short-term lease in the city where my new job would be. A 2-bedroom apartment, clean, simple, modern. No shared walls. No hidden agreements. No fine print. I told Marla the second bedroom was hers if she wanted it. To stay. To visit. To grow into something real. She came to see it that weekend. She didn't say much during the tour. But she stood in the second bedroom for a long time. She ran her fingers along the windowsill, looked out at the skyline, then turned to me. I want this life, she said. I just don't know how to stop being theirs. I told her, you don't need to fight them. Just don't pull away from this. I'll lead, but I can't walk it alone. Before she left, she asked if she could keep a key. I handed it to her. No words. No pressure. She put it in her coat pocket and walked out without looking back. But this time, the door didn't close with finality. It stayed just barely open. 3 weeks passed. No dramatic shifts. Just little signs. A message here. A dinner there. Then one Friday night, there was a knock at the door. She stood there again, tote bag over her shoulder, wearing the same coat, but something in her face had changed. She stepped in, hung the key on the hook by the door, and said, just for now. She didn't unpack. She didn't make declarations. But she stayed. A week later, she said she wanted to return to therapy. Not just for us, on her own, too. She told the therapist. They've been living in my head for so long, I forgot how to have my own voice. That session changed things. We began to talk more, not about fixing what was broken, but about building something new. A few weeks after that, we received a final message from her parents' legal team. They were ready to sell their share. But the asking price still included emotional equity. It was inflated. Intentional. Their goal wasn't fairness. It was to make leaving them feel like betrayal. We countered with a neutral appraisal and a firm offer. Nothing more. Then came silence. And finally, surrender. Her parents signed. No apology. No parting words. Just a wire transfer and a certified letter confirming release of ownership. That evening, a delivery truck pulled up. The crib we'd picked out weeks earlier had arrived. Marla opened the door and smiled. "Looks like we're really doing this," she said. A few days later, another envelope arrived. No return address. No signature. Just a plain card that read, "You've made your bed." She didn't open it. She dropped it straight into the trash. No words. We didn't just decide to have a child. We decided to have our own life. Not the one written for us. Not the one managed, monitored, or measured by anyone else. Just ours. Whatever comes next, it starts here. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.